Hello, class. Welcome to the Citation Basics video here. Hang on, I'm adjusting the sound here. There we go. I think that's a little better. Citation Basics. This is just kind of going over why do we bother with all this citation stuff, and of course for very good reasons. So let's go ahead and start here. Why we cite. Intellectual property and copyright infringement laws is a big reason, and some of that is, avoiding getting in trouble, but it's also really, think about it, if you create something, you want your creation and the knowledge that you created it, and certainly if you have any kind of money that you might be making, you want to be able to make sure you're getting it, but also the recognition because it's an achievement. And so that's why one of the reasons we cite. Here, we often see on the internet that many people will just say, oh yeah, that's real because it's on the internet. Well, that's the other reason. We want to make sure that what we are citing is legitimate. It legitimizes your paper when you can say this is the source. So here we have Michael Scott saying, Abraham Lincoln once said, if you're a racist, I will attack you with the North. Okay, well, so that's not at all true. As we're going to see, Michael Scott doesn't have the best sense of what's true in some cases. So that is one of the reasons, to allow the reader to locate the origin of information so they can check their sources or learn more about the topic if they so desire, right? And so it verifies that information. They can go and see, oh yeah, this person's not just making this up, they're not fabricating it. And they can also, if they want to do further research, they can go look there, and that can be a stepping stone, because you're not writing a paper that's the first and last paper ever written on the topic, right? Especially in this compare-contrast essay, that's not your goal. So you may, though, encourage somebody or inspire somebody to say, I want to read more about this, and your information, when they find that, will ultimately lead to other information, because once they've had to search for that, it takes them to other avenues. So it's very important from that perspective, as well as educators and as learners, that we cite. And then to indicate who is speaking, right? And that's one of the basic reasons we also cite, so that we can say, hey, this content is said by someone else, not me. And that is very important also, to give credit where it's due, but so that just for reader comprehension, basic reader understanding. So let's look at these citation basics here. Different formats, right, of citation exist. There's APA, MLA, ASA, AMA, the Chicago style, etc. They all have differences in formatting, but there's no differences in what needs to be cited, right? Anything that you don't say has got to be cited. That isn't your original idea, even, as we're going to see, if it's general knowledge, well, we've got to make sure, is it really general knowledge? And we're going to look at some ways to tell the difference. Always cite uncommon knowledge, right? You want to make sure that a statistic probably is uncommon knowledge, okay, because they are always in flux, and not many people go around holding that in their heads all day. I know the exact, the reason why something happens scientifically, or maybe a date usually won't change, but perhaps some information comes out that will invalidate something in the past. And so you've got to be sure that uncommon knowledge you are giving citations for. Anything your audience will not be sure of. Statistics, dates, claims that could be challenged, and we'll look at what that is here. So here's when we cite. Anytime you use information from an outside source, including direct quotes, paraphrases, and summaries. Paraphrases are so problematic. I think a lot of students really don't, and I didn't either initially, until it was explained to me, and I learned the hard way, as I think many of us do, that paraphrasing doesn't mean that information's ours just because we rewrote it in our own words. No, it's still not our idea. I could paraphrase an article very well, because I'm very good at doing that, and I think most people can. We paraphrase naturally every day anyway. You may have watched a television show and you paraphrased it for somebody else. You're naturally able to do that. Doesn't mean you didn't write that show, did you? So you would have to give as you would in a conversation, yeah, last night on I don't know, Grey's Anatomy, this happened. Well, people will go, oh yeah, you said it was on Grey's Anatomy. It didn't really happen, and you didn't write the episode. In the same way, it's important when even paraphrasing and summarizing, we've got to be sure we are giving credit where it's due. Citation must happen even when paraphrasing. Failing this leads to unintentional plagiarism, which Turnitin will find, and you will be submitting to Turnitin, and depending on the degree to which that happens, even unintentional plagiarism is not good, right? And that can still have serious academic consequences. Anytime you make a statement that is not common knowledge, even if you knew the information before you write it down. And so recently I read an essay, and there was a word in there that was used correctly, and I thought, I've never seen this word. And I had to look it up, and I thought, oh, interesting. I learned a new word, and that's great. But even if it's something that's common knowledge to you, can't assume it's common knowledge to everybody else. So if you are really well versed in a particular, whatever it may be, discipline, or you have a lot of knowledge of something, make sure you're citing it, though, because especially if it came from a specific source, you want to make sure you give that credit, and not everybody will know those details. Anytime you make a statement you think could be reasonably challenged, you want or need to show you know what you're talking about. Reasonably, I say reasonably because there may be there's always people that will try to challenge you, certainly on the internet, anything. Even if you say the sky is blue for this reason, well, they'll go, "Oh, you sure?" Yeah. Now, there are people that are, trolls and are just out there to be annoying and horrible. I'm not talking about that. In these cases, if you find a statement that you think could be reasonably challenged, somebody might go, I bet you I could go challenge this because it doesn't seem like this is well cited or well sourced. Then you want to make sure that you are doing the right job of citation. Again, you're not writing, in this case, a massive research paper. So you're only dealing with two sources. It's just to make sure that you understand how to cite and why is really what we're doing here. And I don't know why this popped up out of sequence here, but anyway, there it is. Remember, you always assume the reader knows nothing about the topic. That's even if this was not a paper involving citation. Always assume the reader knows nothing. If you proceed from that assumption, you will write the best. Why? Because you will put in details necessary to understanding that you would leave out if you thought the person you were writing to or for knew what you were talking about, and that may not be the case. It is your job to educate them in your writing, right? And that's what you're learning to do. And even in the workplace, you will have to do writing that is going to require you to educate perhaps a customer, perhaps a coworker. Yeah, so it's very critical that we learn how to do that. So here are some examples of what needs citation. I put this here because this is one of my favorite. I love The Office, the first 7 seasons at least, and Michael Scott. I love him. So Wikipedia is the best thing ever. Anyone in the world can write anything they want about any subject, so you're getting the best possible information. Well, Michael doesn't understand that's why it isn't the most reputable site and source, and we don't generally take that as a legitimate source. It's become a lot better. I am old enough to remember when it just came out, and you could write any number of things. Now they've got a lot of because Wikipedia wanted to have more credibility, and so they began to put in more safeguards to make sure that content couldn't be completely erroneous. Some of it's untrustworthy, and you shouldn't trust it. Some of it, though, is usually very well researched and protected, and it's usually experts in the field that are updating those articles. So things have come a long way. Still, should that be the first and only thing that you use in a research paper? Nope. Certainly in this one, you don't even have to worry about it. But when you write any other research paper, I would avoid Wikipedia. It's good to get an overall understanding of something, perhaps, depending on the topic, but certainly I wouldn't quote it unless it makes some kind of example or point you're trying to make there. So, for example, hot water freezes faster than cold water. You would want to cite that because most people don't know that. You remember a few years ago when we had that really cold weather. We didn't down here, but other people in the country did. People were doing videos where they were throwing boiling water out the window, and it was instantaneously freezing before it hit the ground. Well, why is that? I don't know. My intuition would tell me that's not true. It doesn't matter if it's colder, it would freeze faster. Nope. Why? So you would have to cite that because not everybody knows that. I don't know it, except that I know that it does. I can't tell you why because I haven't researched it. So that's why you have to remember to cite it and to pretend the person reading doesn't know anything about the topic. As of 2000, about 91% of United States citizens speak English. Okay, well, that might seem like a common assumption, but you may not have known that. So you've got to cite that. In 2019, divorce rates reached a 40-year low. Most people will know the divorce rates are at a certain level. Like, yeah, they're high. You may not know how that compares with a certain period of time in the past. That's not common knowledge. Here is when you don't cite, though. Common sense and ethics should determine your need for documenting sources. You don't need to give sources for familiar proverbs, well-known quotations, or common knowledge. For example, it is expected that U.S. citizens know that George Washington was the first president, right? So you don't have to explain who he is. Remember that citing sources is a rhetorical task, and as such, can vary based on your audience. If you're writing for an expert audience of a scholarly journal, for example, you may need to deal with expectations of what constitutes common knowledge that differ from common norms. This is from the Purdue OWL. This link in the PowerPoint itself, when you see it, will take you to their website. So this is what they're saying about when we don't cite. And let's talk about what is common knowledge here. Now, again, there are Michael Scotts in the world who don't know common knowledge, right? Sadly. Common knowledge, a fact that is so ubiquitous, most people will know it. The great majority of people know it because it's been around for so long, or it's the sun rises in the east, for example, right? That's common knowledge. No one would bother to argue with you. For example, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Many U.S. citizens speak English, right? Divorce rates have changed over the years. We know those things. They're common knowledge. We wouldn't know if we broke that down into more specific details. And so here's an example. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. Okay, so there's Michael Scott not knowing really how that word works. Keep in mind, common knowledge is entirely, though, dependent on context. So this is an example that was used by another teacher, and she had presented to a conference in November of 2018. So she was talking to people that were a good 20 years older than her, and everybody in the audience was an educator like herself, either an educator still actively teaching or now like a researcher or administrator. So they knew who this Kenneth Burke person is, founder of contemporary rhetorical theory. They knew about that as well. She actually had to explain that Snapchat is popular among young adults and cite that. Not many people of a certain age, in their 60s, right? These would have been folks in their 60s. Maybe not everybody in that age group will know Snapchat is very popular among young adults. I guarantee you, my parents don't know that. They're in their 70s, but they don't know what Snapchat is, right? And so when my children talk to them, they come to me and go, "What is Snapchat again? And is it really that popular?" So it's important that we know the audience, right? The conference was for a council of teachers, and which statement do you think was cited? And it is Snapchat. Had to cite that because not everybody knew that. In-text citations. These are from the MLA 8th edition version. Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And then we put the quotation marks there to close it, and then the parentheses. And I can remember when the period used to go right under those quotes in the old days, but MLA is evolving. That's why it's important that we are aware of the latest requirements. Then we have the page number in parentheses, and then the period. Romantic poetry is characterized by the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, Wordsworth 263. So notice that they mentioned Wordsworth, the author did here, and so didn't mention it here when they did the page citation. But since they didn't mention his name here, they said, hey, this is who said it, and the page upon which they did say it, or write it in this case. Wordsworth extensively explored the role of emotion in the creative process, 263. Here, this is a summary. But notice, they didn't come up with this idea. This is not something that has common knowledge, nor is it original to them, so they put the page here. They cited it, even though they summarized. Now, what if you have no page number? Oh my, can I even use that information? It's no problem. This is becoming more common because as we go forward and things become much more digitally sourced and located, we're going to find that you're not going to have page numbers. Because if you're writing something that's going to only exist as an online periodical or article or whatever it may have been that your source is, well, it may never have had a page number to begin with, and people aren't going to start adding them. So this is not a problem. Don't try to count lines or paragraphs. We used to do that in the old days. Nope, you leave the information out. Here's an example. A recent study explains the reasons for which a student pursues a college education could affect his or her capacity for success. Daily Press admin. You see, you've done the job. It wasn't your idea. You put it in quotes. That tells you, hey, somebody else said this. I'm quoting them. And then you put who it is that said it. And that is all you have to do if there's no page number. It's enough for us to be able to go and say, I can find who and or where this information is and find it. I'll have to read and do more work because there's no page number, but that's not your problem. It's not your fault, right? That's just the nature of the beast now. So that's how you would do that. Another example, according to the Daily Press admin, the reasons for which a student pursues a college education could affect his or her capacity for success. Notice they did it differently there. They just used it in the actual, it's still an in-text citation, but they didn't put it in parentheses, and they didn't, and again, no page number, they did use direct quotes. So there's no problem there at all, and that is not something that should dissuade you from using a source, assuming, right, it's an appropriate source to use. Let's look at this now. Sometimes you may have a case where credible sources don't have named authors. This happens often, but it is not as frequent as what we saw there with page numbers, but it does occur. Remember, in-text citations are supposed to get you to the right entry in the works cited. That's really why they're there. They're there to take you to that works cited page that then shows the source. So you need something in the in-text citation, so you use whatever appears first for that source's works cited entry. Usually this is the title, use a shortened version, a few words if the title is very long. If there's no author, the title is the next piece of information, so it will be the first thing listed in the works cited. You're going to see an example of that in another video, so don't panic if you're not sure what I'm talking about yet. Sometimes the source will be listed by the name of the entity that published it, like Department of Education or Center for Disease Control. Here's an example. A recent study of e-cigarette injuries states, quote, there are 805 lung injury cases reported from 46 states and 1 U.S. territory, unquote. And then we see in parentheses, and quoted, outbreak of lung injury. And the article's full title is Outbreak of Lung Injury Associated with E-Cigarette Use or Vaping. Well, you don't need that whole title. In your in-text citation, it's enough to say outbreak of lung injury. And then we're going to go look in the works cited, and we'll see the full title there. In-text citation placement. In-text citations appear directly after information from an outside source. This includes direct quotes, paraphrases, or summaries. Remember, here are some examples. The process of, quote, documenting sources accurately and fully is required of all researchers, close quotes, and Saylor 281, then the parentheses, and then the period, which is, again, for an older fellow like myself, I can remember when that was different. Saylor notes that, quote, proper documentation distinguishes between the work of others and your ideas, quote, 281, and then the period. Paraphrase summary example. Saylor argues that documenting sources is an integral part of writing credible research papers. 281 in parentheses and the period. And the reason, again, is that's not your original idea, but you can sometimes, I have found this has been a problem I've had that I've noticed after I've written a paper. And I really have overdone it with the in-text citations. Not that I shouldn't have used them, but that you want to vary your use. So sometimes it's better to just summarize something instead, especially if it, when you get into like 6-7 lines and, that's going to make your kind of going to have some unwieldy situations there, just summarize it. And that is a little more work, no doubt. I think a lot of students will just take the path of least resistance, but I think it's better for you as a writer to find a way, can I summarize this, and of course, still cite it properly. Your words should not appear between material from an outside source and the in-text citation. Place citation immediately after you are done using the source. This means that if you include a quote, paraphrase, or summary in the middle of a sentence, the in-text citation will appear in the middle of the sentence. Here's a direct quote example. Inaccurate citation often leads to, quote, accidental plagiarism, Saylor 281, and can negatively affect students' grades. This structure tells the reader this is exactly the information that is not the author's, it's some other author's. It tells us who that author is and where we can find it in that text. Paraphrase summary example. Documentation is, according to Saylor, an integral part of writing a credible research paper. That's said on 281 in that source, which means that first-year composition students need to learn how to cite accurately. Absolutely. Here we have the format. MLA is the author's last name, page number, right? Here's the example, Walker 34. If there's no page number in the original, don't add page numbers, okay? Don't just number it and then do that, because that's not authentic either. If you don't introduce the author in the beginning of the sentence, just use the author's last name. Example, one author, Walker, two authors, Walker and Schuster, three or more, Walker at all. If you introduce author in sentence, no parenthetical citation would be needed, right? So according to Walker, quote, a quote without an in-text citation might look strange, but is accurate when there is not a page number, close quote. If there's no author, use a shortened version of the title. Include quotation marks to indicate that the information is the title, or in the parentheses as a title. Title, MLA sample works cited page, in-text citation, MLA sample. So you're just shortening that. And that is it. So you will then learn more about this. You'll see it in a sample paper, and then we will, in another video, go over the ICE method, which will really give you a good formula to plug in the information and make sure that you're citing correctly and doing it as, and I like to use this word, elegantly as possible, so that it looks great and it flows nicely, and it also covers you as far as making sure you're giving credit to whom and where it is due.